Hello, book burners, and welcome to another episode of Books Are Burning. I'm Mark Will, author, songwriter, and publisher in permanent exile, joined once again by G.J. Villa. Welcome back.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
We're back in black. At least I am. Are you wearing black too? It looks kind of okay.
It is
It
black.
looks
Yeah.
a little bit brown, but okay. We're both back in black because today we will be discussing episode 6 of James Joyce's Ulysses, and that is known as the Hades episode. So get ready, ladies. Lift up your skirts. We're taking a trip to hell. Isn't that what William Carlos Williams said about Ginsberg's Howl? Something like that in the intro. Lift up your skirts, ladies. We're going to take a trip to hell.
I did not
Something
know that.
like that.
All right.
Yeah. Anyway, so briefly before we start looking at the slides, do you want to talk about your experience with episode 6? I myself read it 6 times, appropriately enough.
I only went through twice, right? The first time reading, second time listening as I read, right? That's a great episode. I remember the first time I read Ulysses, since we're putting this in context of rejoicing, going back to Ulysses together after 30 years. But the first time I remember the first 3 episodes with Bloom were like back-to-back smash hits for me, right? So Calypso, Lotus Eaters, Hades. I'm like, holy good Lord, right? What an incredible little triptych of episodes. And then I got to Aeolus, which the first time kind of like threw me off. We'll do Aeolus later, right? And it's a different kind of episode altogether. It's the man at his business in the central headquarters of advertising and whatnot. But these first 3 episodes, you just get such a full portrait of Bloom, and Bloom continues to just expand, and he truly does contain multitudes. So I'll be eager to talk about that today.
Well, also the cast of supporting characters starts to enlarge in this episode, I would say. And go ahead.
No. And just the depiction of the 4 central figures, which we'll talk about, Bloom and the 3 men with whom he's on that funeral carriage going across Dublin to Hades. Incredible portraits too, including Simon Dedalus, right?
Stephen's biological
father,
spiritual father. But yeah, I call those 4 the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, somewhat facetiously, but I think it fits.
Yeah.
So yeah, all right. Well, let's get into it. This time I did listen to the audio book version, which is on YouTube, so I'll put a link to that in the show notes. It's the the RTE, the Irish television version, which is it definitely gives a different perspective. I had not listened to any audiobooks, rereading these first 5 episodes, so I might continue to do that as we go forward.
Given that you are, as always, so scrupulous and you do, half a dozen readings of this one alone, make one of your rereadings a listening too, because I'm going to continue that as well.
Yeah, well, I mean, in fairness, the reason I was able to reread it so many times is because it's been a while since we recorded episode 5, right? Has it been a month?
At least. Yeah. We've been busy
maybe so.
With our own lives and travels and whatnot.
Yeah. Well, interestingly, having completed episode 6, or let's say after we finish recording this podcast, which is the final step in our rereading process, we will have completed 1/3 of the 18 episodes. It's not 1/3 of the book because the first 6 episodes are somewhat shorter than the last 12, but if we're going by the number of episodes, we're like 33% of the way through the book, and at least 33% of the way through our podcasts.
Very true.
We're making good progress, I guess.
Progress today.
So you can see the slideshow there. Rejoice, the Houston Joyce Society rereads Ulysses. That's us. We're the Houston Joyce Society. Mark, Will, and G.J. Villa. We got a new picture of Joyce here. This is, I don't know, he's middle-aged. He's already in exile in Europe, I assume. He's got He's got those glasses and
He's probably in his 30s there, so he's still
okay.
still relatively young. But
He's
I
got
don't
a
know.
he's got a weird face. His eyes are strange, right? Almost
They're like,
rat-like.
or I was thinking bird-like.
Bird-like. Okay,
There's something
yeah.
bird-like about him. Yeah,
That's a nicer way to put it
yeah.
for our literary superhero. But
A little close set, right? Close set bird's
close
eyes.
set. Yeah. Who knows what Nora saw in him?
Yeah. We know what he saw in her.
Yeah. All right. Well, we got a quick update on the male impersonator, which I asked about in episode 5, which was the Lotus Eaters. There's just I think this is in the stream of consciousness. Bloom is thinking to himself, and he says, almost randomly, male impersonator, perhaps he was a woman, and you found this in the Gifford. You want to tell us about it?
It's Gifford's Ulysses annotated. So it's this comprehensive, book of annotations that takes you chapter by chapter, right, and gives you some. You can pick and choose at your leisure, right? Or you can go insane and do every single one if you want, right? I tend to go back and just circle the ones after I've reread the chapter. I'll go back and sort of look at some of the things I've marked and use these to complement some pieces here and there, right? But it's a real treasure. Use it as at whatever speed you like.
Okay, well, this actually there's a series of notes. I think in the same paragraph of stream of consciousness. Bloom is thinking to himself, Hamlet, she played that night. The angle is a little bit. Oh, last night.
What is
Last
the
night.
context here? Is he thinking about Molly in one of her past performances?
No. I think he's remembering a performance that his father, before he committed suicide, may have seen and told him about. So I think this
gotcha.
is his. I think he's remembering his dad said, Hamlet, she played last night. So the note says it was not unusual for heavy 19th century actresses to assume male roles in Shakespeare's plays because the female roles are comparatively thin, and because sustained flamboyant operatic performance was the actor's ideal. And there was a certain Mrs. Palmer that did play Hamlet at the Gaiety Theater on 15 June 1904. Oh, so it's actually the day before June 16th, 1904, which is, the date of the events of this novel. So I guess maybe he saw a notice in the paper or something, and the Freeman's Journal of 16 June notes that she played the part of the prince, and to say the least, sustained it creditably. Okay, so it's not a recollection of what his father was saying. He probably read it in the paper. And then he says something about male impersonator. Again, it's these female actresses playing male roles. Perhaps he was a woman. Why Ophelia committed suicide? So it says here, Bloom unconsciously echoes Edward P. Vining's speculation about Hamlet and adds a further twist that Ophelia's offstage discovery that Hamlet was a woman drove her to madness and suicide. Interesting gender bending there. Oh, poor Papa. That's why I had the idea about his father, the suicide. So it is, this does occur during that recollection of the father. And I think the father was a theater goer himself and kind of had a passion for maybe opera. And so occasionally he'll remember something his dad told him about a performance that moved him.
Right.
Yeah. And of course, his wife is a show person too, a kind of entertainer, singer, serious diva. So anyway, I just thought that was, occasionally I'll come across these little minor details that annoy me, and I have to figure out what he's talking about. Other things probably just pass right by me, but for whatever reason, this caught my attention, and so thank you for checking the GIF.
There you go.
And resolving this question. All right, so once again, these are the texts we're using. GJV is using the double J Random House, I believe, and I've got the this version here without the cover. It is the new modern library edition, or sorry, yeah, the modern library edition. It's not that new. So page references are to those texts. And once again, we're in the middle section of the book, episodes 4 through 15. This is the longest section. These 12 episodes are called the Ulysses section or the Odyssey. And of course, episode 4 started with that big letter M, which we've talked about ad nauseum, so we won't discuss that further. Today, we look at episode 6, Hades, and I've got a little picture of a Hades Disney character, which, you know, I've never seen this movie. I don't even know what it's called, but I think Hades was played by James Woods. It's an interesting choice. Have you seen that? Did that come out when your kids were younger?
Probably, but I can't even remember that far back in terms of this. But that figure does look vaguely familiar.
Anyway, all of these Greek mythological figures are part of the popular culture, and of course, Joyce has contributed to their popularization. I mean, he's basically engaging in the same kind of Disney-esque practice himself, I guess you could say, although aesthetically it's not Disney-esque, let's hope. All right, so here we have the schema for this episode. Remember, Joyce sent various schemata to different confidants and trusted associates, most notably Stuart Gilbert, but there was also an Italian fellow named Lanati that he sent different versions of these schemata to, and then occasionally I've tweaked them a bit, so we're calling this the Gilbert Lanati Will schema. You want to run it down for us, break it down?
Sure. The scene is the graveyard. In fact, the scene, that's the culmination, right? They're en route to the graveyard. So the scene is actually a carriage going towards the graveyard. The hour, 11 a.m., of course, on June 16th, 1904. The organ is the heart. The art is religion, color, white and black, symbol, caretaker. The technique, incubism. And then a series of correspondences, the Dodler, Liffey, Grand Canal, Royal Canal are the four rivers of hell. Cunningham, the character, is Sisyphus. Father Coffey, Cerberus. Caretaker, Hades. Daniel O'Connell, Hercules. Dignam, Elpenor. Parnell, Agamemnon. And Menton, Ajax. So we have a proliferation of correspondences, which, you know, does correspond, I would say, to the scene in the Odyssey, right, where Odysseus travels down into Hades and meets a series of Greek, you know, some contemporaries of his, some legendary sort of figures, and so on, right? So there's a big sort of big cast in Hades as well as in, you know, the original, the Odyssey.
Interestingly, there's no Achilles character, right? We got Ajax, Agamemnon, and so on, but no Achilles.
Also interesting is there's no Clytemnestra, because one of the most moving parts in Homer's work is when he sees his mother, and his mother tells him, you know, he asks, Odysseus learns that his mom's dead, basically, right? Mm-hmm. So he goes and asks her, how did this happen? How did you die? And she essentially says, paraphrasing, I died heartbroken, longing for you. Every day she'd go out to the sea and put out her hands to the ocean, right? So that's interesting, and maybe we'll think about whether there is some sort of Clytemnestra embedded or not, but that is a big moment in the original that I think bears mentioning, given the role of the mother, certainly when it comes to Stephen, right? We've already talked about Stephen's dead mother and so on. But, you know, as the everyman that he is, Bloom has, you know, I'm wondering if there's a Clytemnestra figure for him. Maybe the father, right? Rudy is obviously, the suicide father is perhaps a kind of gender-bended Clytemnestra. I don't know. But anyhow, so I just wanted to throw that in there.
Okay, well, it's been a while since I've read the Odyssey, but Clytemnestra is not Odysseus' mother.
Excuse me. No, not Clytemnestra. Odysseus' mother, right, whose name I forget, yeah.
Right. I can't remember her name either, but Clytemnestra is the murdered wife of Agamemnon.
Yeah, let me amend everything. I meant Anticlea, right? And I think I thought Clytemnestra because Clytemnestra is mentioned. Agamemnon, when talking to Odysseus, basically says, "Don't trust any woman," right? Because let me tell you what happened to me, and tells about the way in which he was betrayed and murdered by Clytemnestra.
Right.
Anyway, yes, Anticlea. My bad.
Okay, that's interesting. Her name, it means anti-glory, something like that.
Okay.
I have to look into that maybe for the show notes. All right, yeah, I think these correspondences are a bit iffy, and I'll explain why in a minute. But first, the art, religion. Remember the art of, was it episode 1? Was
Yes.
theology. So maybe we can think about how is this different? How is religion different from theology? Maybe not a very, significant point, but I don't know. I'm curious how we are to distinguish those two.
Well, I would immediately say that theology in chapter 1, we have the irreverence of the theologian, Buck Mulligan, right? And Stephen's own disdain for Catholicism. And so that's maybe an intellectual framework, right? Whereas religion will deal with the human rights, in this case, of burial, right?
Religion is more a matter of the heart, perhaps.
Yes. Yeah.
And theology is more of the mind, even though there's no organ for episode 1.
Right.
Yeah, that's something to consider.
Something we'll think about, perhaps. Yeah.
Well, here's one reason why I think the correspondences are iffy. Gilbert or Lanati or whoever it was, I think it was Gilbert actually, where I got this, mentions 4 rivers of hell. There are actually 5. There is Acheron, Cocytus, Styx, Lethe, and Phlegethon. Not 4, so I'm not sure what that's about. Because, there's actually another river not listed that runs through Dublin. That's the River Tolka. So could it be that is the 5th and Gilbert just failed to note that? I mean, I don't think in Hades there's a specific reference to, there is to the Liffey, fair enough, like the son of Reuben J. Dodd
gets thrown in the Liffey.
Gets thrown in or falls in or whatever, right? I don't remember a specific mention of the daughter, but maybe I missed that. And maybe there's some allusion to the Tolka too. Joyce would have known there are 5 rivers of Hades, right? So why would there be 4 listed in Gilbert's correspondences?
Good point.
Yeah.
For me, I think the correspondences, for me, there's some that are more prominent and maybe just subjectively more interesting to explore.
Oh, absolutely.
Religion versus, the rivers.
But if you do count, my point is, if I have a point, my point is that if you count the Grand Canal, if you count the 2 canals, right? The Grand Canal and the Royal Canal, and you add in the Tolka, there actually are 5 rivers running through Dublin, which, that's interesting because there is an actual correspondence there, right? Why stop at 4 when there's actually 5?
Right.
Yeah, so is Dublin itself a kind of hell or purgatory or Hades or something?
Well, certainly that's the whole theme of that's the whole theme of Dubliners, which runs contemporary, right? The theme of paralysis, right? All these Dubliners in a state of paralysis. So yes, I think that would be the answer to the question.
They're in Dante's Purgatorio, maybe.
Perhaps, yeah.
Yeah, Dubliners. That actually, a lot of the characters I realized that are introduced in this episode appeared before in Dubliners.
Intertextuality.
Yeah,
That's right. The Joycean universe is coherent and complete and quite vast.
All right, so here's the scene. When we say the graveyard, we're talking about Glasnevin Cemetery, or should we say symmetry? Spell it like the Smiths do, drop one of those E's. If you're watching the slides, you can see the picture of this modern construction, almost looks like something from the Bauhaus. Very interesting. I remember that well. Do you? It's like
Yes.
near the entrance. It's where we gathered before we took
Yeah.
that tour. So
Yep.
that's there. But also, when you take the stroll through the grounds, you will see this large cone, which is the Daniel O'Connell monument, the so-called liberator. There's also a big statue of him on one of the main thoroughfares. But we went in there, the tour went in there. I remember seeing like flowers left by John and Yoko. Do you remember that?
I don't remember that, but I remember going in there.
Yeah, and there's the Parnell monument. It's just a big stone with one word on it, Parnell. We passed by that too. Interesting that Protestant was buried in this mostly Catholic graveyard. But anyway, those two Irish, legends or heroes or nationalistic heroes are mentioned in this episode. And then at the bottom, you can see this picture of like the headstones of the nameless, all the, what does he say, all the hearts and hands of Dublin, something like that.
Yeah, and look how closely packed too, and how multitudinous the stones are.
And a lot of them were in disrepair. A lot of broken stones, and it was an interesting place, interesting site to visit. And if you have the chance, you should go there.
And I should add that we visited that on Bloomsday many
yes,
years
we did.
ago. And,
wearing our HJS t-shirts.
And watched a performance of the scene, men who were in character doing the scene. So anyway.
Oh, that's right. They rode up in a carriage, didn't they? And then they came out and stood by the... Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, that was great. All right, so who are these characters? Well, of course, we've got Bloom, as always, and we didn't mention this before, but the inspiration for Bloom, most people agree, was a certain Aaron Hector Schmitz, a Jewish friend of Joyce's, who wrote under the pen name Italo Suevo. And I think we tried to read one of his books and had to give up on it. Maybe it was a bad translation, but it didn't really do it for us.
Zeno's Conscience, maybe. I don't remember.
It's the one something about like the last cigarette. Joke is that every cigarette is the last until the next one,
Right.
He's constantly giving up cigarettes. This is my last cigarette, and then the next day he smokes another one. So that becomes the last cigarette. But I don't know. It didn't. Again, maybe it was a bad translation, but I don't think I even finished reading whatever novel of his it was. But interesting, because as we said before, Bloom kind of fancies himself a writer too. Apparently, Joyce championed the work of his friend, Italo Suevo, and ensured that, he got published. Or I don't know, maybe I exaggerate his influence on Italian publishing houses, but he's fairly well known in Italy, I think. Maybe he's not as well remembered as, what's the great Pirandello, the great playwright, but roughly contemporaneous with him. And so we've got these other interesting characters. Martin Cunningham, probably most important of the other three horsemen. Jack Power, Simon Dedalus, he's pretty important too. Corny Kelleher, Tom Kernan, John Henry Menton, Ned Lambert, Joe Hines, Father Coffey, John O'Connell. He's the caretaker, basically the undertaker. Caretaker has a different meaning here in Taiwan. It's the person that cares for the elderly. We've got a lot of overseas workers here from the Philippines and Indonesia and so on that care for old people. They're called caretakers. So
right.
It's interesting. And then we've got a Lynchian mystery man. More about him in a bit. And actually, most of my notes relate to these characters, as you'll see. All right. On the technique of incubism, what is he talking about? Why does he say the technique? the literary style is incubism. And so I found this on one of our favorite websites, Blooms and Barnacles. It says, in his schema for Hades, James Joyce listed the technique for Ulysses' sixth episode as incubism. If you're like most people, you likely have no idea what this means. That's perfectly reasonable, as it seems to be a neologism coined by Joyce. Incubism is often interpreted as a reference to an incubus, a type of demon that sits on the chest of a sleeping person and forces itself sexually on the sleeper. There's a famous painting of an incubus by a British painter. I'll put that in the show notes. There's also a band that I don't particularly care for with that name. And the feminine version is the succubus. That's the female type that, visits young men in their dreams and rapes them, gives them wet dreams. I've had visitations a few times in my life. It makes sense then that a stifling incubistic atmosphere takes hold in Hades, a demonic energy ruling an episode infused with death. Even cheese is regarded as the corpse of milk. In an episode where every Friday buries a Thursday, Leopold Bloom reflects frequently on the inhumation of the dead, the weight of soil on a coffin bearing down on his psyche. Any thoughts about that?
I think that's really good. I think that's a great way to... there is a kind of weight, kind of brooding weight that hangs over, and it really is accentuated by when Bloom is leaving the cemetery, and he has this tremendous sense of relief to be gone from the dead. So, I think this is a great explanation.
And I like the idea of the good quotes related to that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and also I remember the word gloom, gloomy, some form of that appearing several times,
Right.
So there is a feeling, it's almost like Burke's notion of the sublime, which is a kind of it elicits a kind of terror, or uneasiness.
Bloom is going to be thinking some thoughts about the corporeality of the body, right? The rotting flesh and so on. So there's a true to his commitment to realism, psychological and otherwise, right? We have some very graphic scenes.
Very graphic and beautifully so. I mean, they're disgusting, but at the same time, just so precisely described, you can't help but
it's kind of like the
admire and love them.
The graveyard sublime, is the almost kind of feel that you get from this this episode. So yeah, I like it. Incubism.
But as you've already suggested, and as you mentioned in your notes, Bloom's reaction to all that is very interesting. We'll save that for your notes. All right, so here's the plot summary I sent you, and you gave it your approval, so I included it here. I noticed that really there are two parts. Like, this episode is split almost perfectly in half, right? As you suggested, part one is actually the trip to the graveyard. So I said the four horsemen of the apocalypse, one of whom has soap in his pocket, that's our hero, of course, ride in a carriage to Glasnevin Cemetery. Along the way, they pass Stephen, but not Mulligan, the Grand Canal, Blazes Boylan, Reuben J. Dodd, some cattle and sheep, perhaps with foot and mouth disease, the Royal Canal, and a bargeman while discussing the weather, poor Dignam, suicide, the Gordon Bennett race, and the child's murder case. And I base my notes on this as well, mostly characters, but some of the things mentioned here too. All right. So half of the episode is them traveling to hell, you could say, making the journey there. And then the second half is them actually in the graveyard. So Hades plot summary part 2. For that, I wrote, at Glasnevin, the funeral party encounters Father Coffey, John Henry Menton, the deceased's former employer. At one time, we learned he employed Dignam, but he has another important significance we'll talk about later. O'Connell's grave, Tom Kernan, suspected Mason, Corny Kelleher, funeral director, the caretaker, undertaker, a mystery man, McIntosh, and Parnell's grave. Upon leaving, Bloom informs John Henry Menton that his hat has a dinge in it. That's like the only thing that happens. There's a dinge in John Henry Menton's hat, and Bloom points it out. That's like a significant action for reasons we'll discuss later. And then, of course, throughout, we were given access to Bloom's stream of consciousness. And that's one of the things I noticed about the audio book version, right? You've got the voice of the narrator, you've got the voice of all the characters, but then you've got kind of a reverb laden voice of the character, of the actor playing Bloom, doing all of these stream of consciousness bits.
Right.
And in this episode, it's all, I think all the stream of consciousness is from Bloom's perspective. There's no other character whose interior monologue we're given access to, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And yeah, I think being able to hear the omniscient narrator and then Bloom's inner monologue is really stands out in that recording, in this scene. And Joyce, of course, let's not forget that he was innovating at the time, right? Because there was nothing distinguishing in terms of punctuation or convention. The difference between those two is your reading, right?
It's very good, that RTE version, but there were probably 2 or 3 times when I thought maybe either it was the Bloom actor doing the interior monologue or the narrator, and it should have been the other way around.
Yeah.
So it is a very different experience, because as you're reading it, you're just reading it, and maybe you're not always conscious of who's saying what, which I don't know. I don't know what I like better, right? Like, do I want to hear it all in one voice? Like, is it just one narrative voice assuming all of these different roles, or do I like it better when there's this differentiation with an ensemble cast? I mean, maybe it depends on my mood, but you have to admit it's very different, right?
It's
different experience.
And for me, I'd just say it's a both and rather than either or, right? I mean,
sure,
you can enjoy both. But yeah, it is. For me, I'm enjoying doing this the second time around as one of my reads, because typically I do maybe about 2 per chapter, 2 per episode, not quite as many as you, right? But one of which is the audio. I started doing that with the Bloom sections. I have not gone back and done the first 3 Stephen episodes. I haven't listened to those, but so when I heard Stephen's voice in the next chapter, the next episode, Aeolus, right? It's like, okay, that's Daedalus's voice. Made me curious to go. Eventually, I'll go back and listen to the first 3 episodes.
There's a version of maybe it's Portrait rather than Ulysses, but the guy that played the talented Mr. Ripley in the Netflix series. He's an Irish actor. I can't remember his name. Looks like David Byrne.
Yes. He's excellent.
He plays Stephen in some production, like some national production. It would be interesting to hear him do it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, Ripley, right? Yeah, but Tom Ripley is the name of the character, but the Irish actor that plays him in the Netflix series, I might add.
And Andrew Scott is his name. Yeah, he's fantastic.
He's really good. So I imagine he would do a good Stephen. All right. Well, moving on. Oh, it's your notes. Via's notes. Take it away.
All right. And please, obviously, just dive in anyway. Well, the first thing, and we were talking before we started recording how every episode there's just more and more and more, and you really have to become, in terms of, selectivity, you have to sort of pick and choose, right? There's so much. But Simon Daedalus, for me, stands out, right? He's we get a snapshot of, Stephen's father, right? A trenchant wordsmith, an embittered patriarch, maudlin widower, and his voice is just distinct from the beginning, right? He has this biting contempt for his in-laws, for Buck Mulligan. He has an amazing ability to make these comparisons. It's a kind of overcast day. The sigh is as uncertain as a child's bottom, he tells us, right? But
one of my favorite Simonisms, as I'm calling them.
For sure, right? So anyhow, he just stands out to me as a very distinctive voice, right? In reference to Buck Mulligan, right? They pass Stephen on the street, right? Who is that? It's your son and heir. Where is he? Stretching over a cross, right? Was that Mulligan cad with him? His fetus acates? No, Mr. Bloom said. He was alone. And then he says about Stephen, down with his Aunt Sally, I suppose. With the Goulding faction. The drunken little costrawer and Chrissy, Papa's little lump of dung, the wild child that knows her own father. So his contempt for his in-laws is hilarious, right? I had to look up costrawer, but that's a law clerk, right?
Cost drawer, one who draws costs, I guess.
Yeah, basically
He's a money grubber.
Richie's a law clerk, basically, right?
Yeah.
And Chrissy, his daughter, Papa's little lump of dung, the wild child that knows her father.
That's hilarious.
And then he, in reference to Mulligan, he says, I won't have, when he's thinking about Mulligan and his bad influence on Stephen, he says about Stephen, he's in with a low-down crowd. That Mulligan is a contaminated, bloody, double-eyed ruffian by all accounts. His name stinks all over Dublin. And then he basically says, but I'm going to tell his aunt about this mofo, right? He says, I won't have her bastard of a nephew ruin my son, a counterjumper's son, selling tapes in my cousin, Peter Paul McSweeney's. Not likely. A counterjumper is apparently son of a shop clerk, right? So he's, again, being in both of these cases, dismissive of these people who he sees as being under him, right? The costrar, a law clerk, and now a counterjumper's son, right? The son of a shop clerk. He himself is in financial...
And meanwhile, we find out later about him and his situation and the way he treats his children.
Well, we also know that this is based on Joyce's own father, right? That he once had some means, but has long since squandered much of the family fortune. So, but he still has this sort of classist contempt for these people. And the last thing I'll say is he when he gets to his wife's grave, and this is after Bloom, our hero, has been thinking about things like the death of his son, the death of his father's suicide, and handling those things with such maturity and such gravity, but such humanity. He says, her grave is over there, about his wife, right? This is Simon Dedalus. I'll soon be stretched beside her. Let him take me whenever he likes. Breaking down, he began to weep to himself quietly, stumbling in his little walk. So he's a model.
I guess she's in heaven, if there is a heaven.
Right.
That sentimentalism is, I mean, I don't know how you take it, but to me, it's a bit disgusting after he's maudlin and mawkish, like after this bitter gall that he, spills all over his auditors as he's discussing Mulligan, as if, also, like Stephen is not willingly hanging out with him, right? It's like, he's corrupting my son. Of course, it couldn't be the other way around.
Exactly, right. So there's a lot of posturing, a lot of pomp, a lot of sentimentality, etc. And I think it's important because this is Stephen's biological father, right? And we know that Bloom is destined to be his spiritual father, among other things, as it were, metaphorical father, right? And we have this complete contrast, particularly when we get to the Daedalus's wife's grave, right? The contrast between that maudlin sentimentality and Bloom's incredible capacity to really plumb the depths of loss and death and so on, right? And let's not forget also that Stephen in chapter 1, right, haunted by his mother, right, who's come back to torment him in these dreams and so on. And I think that also stands in contrast to Simon Daedalus's maudlin sentimentality here.
Yeah.
Anyhow, moving on. Anything else you want to say about?
Did you want to say something about Bloom, or
we'll get to that? I mean, that's the next. I didn't know if you wanted to say anything else about Simon Daedalus.
Oh no. I've got something I'll add later. Just continue with your bullet points here.
So, in contrast to the biological father of Stephen, Telemachus, right, we have Bloom, our modern Ulysses, who's traveling in the funeral hearse. He's musing on loss. He's musing on conception. He's musing on filial loyalty. Some of the things I noticed is that he is a father in need of a son. He has this ongoing mourning for the loss of the son, right? And about Simon Dedalus, Bloom thinks to himself, noisy, self-willed man, full of his son. He is right. Something to hand on. If little Rudy had lived, my son, me in his eyes, it's poignant there, right? So he kind of recognizes the noisiness.
He could have taught him German.
Right.
That was an interesting detail.
And from that, his mind just naturally goes to conception, daughters and mothers, the cycle of life continuing. He has a recollection of Rudy's conception at one point, he recalls. Molly saying to him, give us a touch, Poldy. God, I'm dying for it.
That's such a great passage, one of the most memorable,
Give us a touch, Poldy, right. And then right after that, with no marking typographically, right, to showcase the transition from that memory of her voice to his thoughts, he says, how life begins. Got big then. So we got conception there. He starts thinking about his daughter, who we've already talked about in previous episodes, right? Molly, Millie, same thing, watered down. Soon to be a woman. Mullinger. Remember, Mullinger is where she is right now, right? On her own for the first time. Dearest Papley. Young student. Yes, a woman too. Life. So he recalls a fragment from the letter, Dearest Papley, the fact that there's a young student there might be interested in her. And he accepts the fact that eventually, if not now, his daughter will partake of this cycle of life, and life will continue. She will ask to be touched or be touched, and so on. So
literally, yes.
Literally, yes, as we will know. Right, exactly. We have a father's dying wish and a son's loyalty, I noticed. He's referring to the note he found from his father, right? And the father asks his son to take care of the dog, his dog, right? The quote is, poor old Athos. Be good to Athos, Leopold, is my last wish. Thy will be done. We obey them in the grave.
That's such a Greek name, huh?
Athos, yeah. And it's also one of the Three Musketeers, I believe, right?
Yeah. Okay.
Right.
Charlie Sheen or one of the other guys. I have to look that up.
Exactly. Right. But anyway, all of this together, I mean, we just have such, this is what I was talking about. Bloom is the full everyman who is in contrast to Simon Dedalus's, maudlin theatricality and this mourning for loss, this recognition of conception, that life goes on, these poignant memories. I mean, his son died at 11 days old. His father's a suicide, right? And here he is going to a grave. So just incredible portrait of our modern Ulysses. And he continues to become this expansive character episode by episode. He contains multitudes.
He does. All right. Next slide. Carry on.
There's a reference to this Ben Dollard singing of the Crappie Boy, and the phrase retrospective arrangement is used. So here's an example of that. The notion that there's an arranger, right? The godlike arranger, which is Joyce, the artist, who's created this interlocked universe, right? So Ben Dollard's going to appear later in the Wandering Rocks episode, and he's going to sing the song in the Sirens episode. So here's just dropped in, right? Later we'll see this expanded. When they're about to enter Hades, I just found this line really moving. You have sort of the published names of the dead fading fast, akin to the disembodied shades in the Odyssey. In the Odyssey, all the shades are these disembodied figures, and to conjure them, you have to offer blood, right? Because they crave blood, right? So they lack blood, they need that life force to exist, because they're just these disembodied shades. And as Bloom notices the ink characters fading fast on the frayed breaking paper.
No, that's great. Yeah.
I think that's an amazing image, right? But again, the idea that ultimately mortality is this fleeting thing, and even the dead will ultimately be forgotten, right? Later, he's musing on the inevitability of being cuckolded by Blazes Boylan, who he thinks to himself is by the worst man in Dublin, quote unquote, right? And Bloom has some suspicions and paranoia that Powers, one of the men in this episode, and maybe all of Dublin might know that he is being cuckolded or is going to be cheated on, right? And you remember in the previous episode, he had the same suspicions about McCoy, right? So we have these ongoing anxieties about his inevitable cuckoldry, and also the kind of uh, shame at thinking that all of Dublin knows what the hell's going on here.
Well, there's something interesting. I'll add to that later, but for now, I'll just note that there was another suspicion about McCoy as well, as I read it anyway. Remember, is he pimping after me?
Yeah,
So,
right, exactly.
but carry on.
Once again, Joyce makes clear that Bloom is a cultural outsider. We have the ugliness of anti-Semitism occur, right? They pass by, I guess it's Reuben J. Dodd, right?
Mm-hmm.
And of the tribe of Reuben, right?
Mm-hmm.
One of them says, right? That is, he's Jewish. And there's some gleeful gossip about Reuben J. Dodd, a Jewish moneylender whose services the other men have resentfully availed themselves of, right? And throughout this episode, Bloom is trying to interject, and he gets basically interrupted or ignored, right?
Yeah, he's eagerly trying to pile on his fellow Jew, and he's basically not allowed to.
Yeah, exactly. And the
hey guys, hey, did you hear what happened?
Right. They basically ignore him, right? But when they're talking about the Jewish moneylender, we have all been there. Martin Cunningham said broadly. In other words, we've all availed ourselves of his services. His eyes met Mr. Bloom's eyes. He caressed his beard, adding, "Well, nearly all of us." So Bloom has not, right? Availed himself of these the Jewish moneylender, but the rest of them resentfully have, right? The story they tell is apparently Reuben J. Dodd's son fell into the Liffey, the real Liffey, and he shouted for help, and people dragged him out, and then he gave some money to whoever had helped his son, and the men deemed it like just a pittance, right? It underscores his even if your son's almost dead, what kind of thanks do you give?
He's a miser.
He's a miser. He's stingy. He doesn't give much money. So we have these ugly anti-Semitic tropes here, and Bloom is sitting there in the middle of them, right?
Well, but it's nuanced because Bloom has a certain view of Reuben J. Dodd himself. I mean, he doesn't want to associate himself with him,
right?
As well. I mean, I won't give it away, but in a later episode, he has some choice words to describe this man of the tribe of Reuben.
Indeed. Patty Dignam, who is the man's funeral we are traveling towards, right? So he is apparently Elpenor, and in the Odyssey, Elpenor, I think they're on Cersei's Isle, perhaps, right? But he's basically on a roof and is drinking, and he falls and breaks his neck and dies, right?
Yeah.
So a kind of ignoble death. After having been at Troy for 10 years, he's on his way home. He drinks too much. He falls off a roof and dies, right? So here's a depiction of Patty Dignam from Bloom's perspective, and Bloom is pretty compassionate here, right? Too much John Barleycorn, cure for a red nose, drink like the devil till it turns Adelaide. A lot of money he spent coloring it. Elpenor, Patty Dignam, like Elpenor, drank too much, right? And he dies suddenly, right? Patty Dignam, apparently we learned that he dies suddenly, just as Elpenor did. And Bloom muses, the best death, no suffering, a moment and all is over. Like dying in sleep, no one spoke. Later we hear that Dignam
They're stunned by this comment, the best death, no one spoke. They're like, what?
They don't understand that, right?
Yeah.
Whereas he does. We later learn that Dignam has left behind 5 young children, and things look perhaps the men are gossiping about that and wondering if the kids will end up in homes, perhaps. Who knows, right?
And one of them, I can't remember who it is, Ned Lambert, maybe. He's talking about how they're collecting money for the kids, right, to support their education. And we find out later that Bloom willingly donated. That's not in this episode, but we do learn that 2 or 3 episodes later.
Mm.
But guess what? Simon Dedalus, when it's mentioned to him, he says, yes, 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 uneasily or uncertainly or something like that. There's a great description of his non-reaction to that. He just quickly passes over that because, of course, he's not going to contribute jack shit.
Right. Awesome.
All
Let's
right,
go on.
moving on.
We have meditations on infanticide and suicide, and there's references to the untimely death of children. And of course, that's exactly what Bloom has already experienced. They pass by on the street. The trigger for all these thoughts is they pass by the street, basically a funeral procession for a baby, right? A tiny coffin flashed by in a hurry to bury a mourning coach, right? Sad, Martin Cunningham said, a child, right? And then Bloom thinks, a dwarf's face, mauve and wrinkled like little Rudy's was. Dwarf body, weak as putty, in a white-lined deal box. So we have that, right? Then the men on the in the funeral hearse start talking about suicide, and Powers has this condemning view of suicide. Martin Cunningham is a little bit more charitable about it, right? And Martin Cunningham is a little bit more charitable about it because he's the only one that realizes, dudes, Bloom, this guy who's with us, he's lost his child. His father committed suicide, right? Bloom is silent the entire time while they're condemning suicide, right? And again, the condemnation is the orthodox version of suicide that the Catholic Church promulgates, right? That it's a sin. It's we can't mourn for those who commit suicide. They will not go to heaven. Very judgmental point of view, right?
Well, Bloom is about to speak, but then apparently thinks better of it. He opened his lips to speak, and then that's a very important detail, right? It's not that he just sat there in silence. He was going to say something, and then he either was interrupted or he missed his chance, or he thought better of it. So that's important to note. I would also point out that infanticide is the killing of an infant. And
right.
That didn't happen with little Rudy. He just died.
No. Right. And the infanticide is mentioned later as one of this apparently sensationalistic child's fratricidal murder case. Oh no, that's a different thing. My bad.
They were adult brothers, but they were named child, so that's interesting.
But it is interesting that we have meditations on heavy topics like suicide, infanticide, later fratricide, right?
Fratricide, yeah.
And incubism.
Parallel to the memory of the death of Rudy, there's actually a funeral being held at the same time. They go to Dignam's service for a baby, a child.
Right.
That's going on when they get there, right?
Exactly.
And they comment on that. Oh, poor little one. He's well out of it, says Simon Dedalus.
And interestingly, you mentioned that Bloom is about to speak, but closes his lips again when they're talking about suicide. I read it as he chooses not to. He's like, it's not even worth it. I'm not going to say anything, right? And then he thinks to himself, he's looking at Martin Cunningham, and he thinks, sympathetic human man he is, intelligent, like Shakespeare's face, always a good word to say, right? And then he says, they have no mercy on that here, suicide, or infanticide, refuse Christian burial, right? So here he is, the outsider, recognizing the lack of mercy in these men other than Martin Cunningham. But he doesn't say anything. I think that's moving, right? The modern Odysseus's victory is in his mind, not in his actions. That he understands it, he notes it, perhaps condemns it, right, but doesn't act upon it, right? Let's see, and then later he recalls his father's overdose, right? He goes into the hotel room where his father overdosed, and we have this here. He thought he was asleep at first, then saw like yellow streaks on his face, had slipped down to the foot of the bed. Verdict, overdose. Death by misadventure. The letter, for my son Leopold. No more pain, wake no more, nobody owns. Good stuff. Later, Cunningham's going to tell the other two men when he's apart from Bloom. He says to them, "I was in agony with you talking of suicide before Bloom."
I think he just says that to Power. I don't think
He says that
Deadless
to
is.
Power. Okay,
Yeah.
right. When we get to the land of the dead, we have the funereal statues. I love this description here. The stonecutter's yard on the right, last lap, crowded on the spit of land, silent shapes appeared, white, sorrowful, holding out calm hands, knelt in grief, pointing. Fragments of shapes, hewn in white silence, appealing. I just think that's just
The mention
fantastic.
of there are actually quite a few references to white, which is one of the colors of this episode, which we might think of as being primarily black, right? Black being the traditional funereal color, but I would say there are an equal number of allusions to white. There's description of like white corpses or something, or like the rotted corpses turn white. There's something about like white turnips,
Right.
like the humus, right? The ground in which all these this is almost Baudelairean. There's like a Baudelaire sonnet of Baudelaire called "The Joyous Dead," right? Le Mort Joyeux, and it's talking about a ground greasy and full of snails. So we've got these descriptions which often feature the color white. Interestingly,
Right. So there are these beckoning statues that seem to me almost like wraiths or ghosts beckoning them into like the physical confines of the cemetery. They start talking about what at the time was a sensationalistic fratricidal murder case, the Child's fratricidal murder case. There are some Shakespearean allusions there. Unweeded garden, murder will out, etc.
what's unweeded garden?
That's from Hamlet. It's a depiction of the kind of fallen state of Denmark with post regicide. It's described as an unweeded garden.
Okay.
We have the ubiquity and inevitability of death and oblivion. Again, those heavy topics, the incubism. Here's a handful of lines from Bloom's mind. He thinks to himself, funerals all over the world, everywhere, every minute, shoveling them under by the cartload double quick, thousands every hour, too many in the world. So just this, ongoing piles of death all the time. The clay fell softer, begin to be forgotten, out of sight, out of mind, Bloom thinks. And then later, pray for the repose of the soul of, does anybody really plant him and have done with him? Like down a coal chute, then lump them together to save time.
He's got all these practical considerations,
That's right. Exactly.
Like why do we bury them in a
horizontally,
supine position? Why don't we just stick them in the ground straight up vertically, right? Like wouldn't that save space?
Yeah, so if anything, there's Orthodox Catholics would certainly say that those are impious, if not blasphemous thoughts, right? But Bloom's, he just has them naturally here.
Well, and he also has the idea of running a tram from downtown to the cemetery, and
the pragmatic mind of his. Exactly. He's certainly not thinking about the pieties of funeral rites and so on, right?
Well, from the Catholic perspective, and why would he? But before we leave this slide, another word about Shakespeare. I mean, it just occurred to me that just as Stephen, has Bloom for his spiritual father, Shakespeare is kind of an ambiguous spiritual father for Joyce, right? Like he's the great rival. Those new critics talked about the anxiety of influence and everything. There's certainly an element of that.
Right.
Yeah. Was it Bloom? There's certainly Bloom. How interesting. Yeah. But there's certainly an element of that in Stephen for sure, who has a begrudging kind of admiration for Shakespeare. He wants to take him down a few pegs, and I guess he does in the library, which we'll get to in 2 or 3 more episodes. So Shakespeare, but again, Bloom, there's that parallax, right? Bloom is also thinking about Shakespeare in his way,
Right.
as Stephen is. And interestingly, it's specifically Hamlet, which is something that Stephen talks about later.
And Bloom is not even, Bloom is not even, just those Shakespeare images go through his head. He's not, as we'll see in the library scene, he's not pontificating the way that Stephen does, right? Stephen there has got his theory. We'll get to that eventually. All right. Again, just there's a lot of humorous observations from the everyman Ulysses, the cultural and religious outsider, right? I won't read all of these, but some of them are hilarious, right? Makes them feel more important to be prayed over in Latin. Requiem mass, crepe weepers, the priest took a stick with the knob out of the boy's bucket and shook it over the coffin, then walked to the other end and shook it again. I just think that's hilarious. The stick with the knob, right? The way in which it's sort of demystified, right? What else is there, right?
Yeah, that's the narrator, but it seems to be from Bloom's perspective, right?
That's exactly. That's the narrator, but it does seem to be akin to what Bloom would think in terms of his observations.
Yeah.
Here's Bloom the Jew on the resurrection. The resurrection and the life. Once you are dead, you're dead. That last day idea, knocking them all up out of their graves. Come forth, Lazarus. So there's a series of those, right? He later thinks cremation better. Priests dead against it, right? And then later he thinks about drowning. Drowning, they say, is the pleasantest. See your whole life in a flash. But being brought to life, no. So he rejects outright here the notion of resurrection. For Bloom, once you're dead, you're dead. The show's over. You're eventually forgotten, right? And again, if you're going to be devoted to anything, it's this world, right? Not the next world.
Just to continue with that thought about the cremation being better, in that same paragraph, he says, ashes to ashes, or bury at sea. Where is that Parsi tower of silence, eaten by birds? Earth, fire, water. Drowning, they say, is the pleasantest. See your whole life in a flash, but being brought back to life, no. Can't bury in the air, however. He reflects on basically death by all of the elements, and reading this, I'm wondering, is this where Eliot got all his ideas for the wasteland, death by water, sure. And
right.
Whatever other sections there are in that overrated modernist ripoff of Ulysses.
You're not a big fan of the wasteland, huh?
Well, I mean, it's fine, but we all know what well he was drawing from, and it wasn't just Jesse, whatever her name was, who wrote the mythological book. He definitely was poaching in Joycean fields.
Right.
Maria, our friend Maria, found a hilarious comment by Virginia Woolf about Eliot after he converted. As a staunch atheist, she had nothing but scorn for his newfound Anglo-Catholicism or whatever it was, right? I'll have to find that quote. It is scathing in the best possible way.
She was also scathing about Ulysses. She said it was something like the work of a grubby undergraduate, like picking on his pustules or something. She used some, I'm paraphrasing, right?
Hater, jealous.
Yeah. She called it underbred,
Yeah.
It was just anyway, what else? We do get.
She could afford to have a room of her own because Daddy and her family made that possible. But okay.
Well, I'm a Wolf fan as well, so.
Well, I like her too, but
anyway,
facts
I certainly
is
don't
facts.
Agree with her take on Ulysses. In any case, later we have a couple of the men gossiping about Molly and Bloom. It's Ned Lambert and John Henry Menton. And Menton, one of his memories is having danced with her. He says, she's a fine-looking woman. I danced with her, 15, 17 golden years ago at Matt Dillon's in Roundtown. In a good armful she was.
That's great.
Good armful.
She had a big rack.
That's right. they wonder what the hell she's doing with Bloom, right? So there's this ongoing disdain for Bloom and his masculinity. Both Menton and Bloom recall that there's apparently some conflict between them years ago with some kind of, what was it? What was the specific conflict? A bowling game or something like that?
Yeah.
Anyway, some kind of game they were playing, and there was some sort of conflict. And according to Gifford, Menton is Ajax, right? So Ajax
That makes sense.
wouldn't speak to Odysseus in the underworld, right? Because Odysseus was given Achilles' armor, and Ajax wanted it, right, after Achilles was dead, right? So we've got that correspondent there, right? I'm trying to think if there's anything else. You'll probably deal with the hat bit later, right? Bloom thinks about a funeral as an ideal pickup place. I just thought this was pretty funny. You might pick up a young widow here. Men like that. Love among the tombstones. Romeo, spice of pleasure. In the midst of death, we are in life. I love that little inversion of that phrase. But here we have that tomb womb thing again that we talked about earlier, right? Amidst death, life will again continue, right? One way or the other. Trying to see if there's anything else. Let's see. Yeah, we can go on, I guess. Good Lord, how much should I take? I'm going to try to be fast here.
This is your last slide.
Okay. They're just, our hero's going to confront the brute nastiness of death. Bloom imagines the physical rotting of corpses. So it gets increasingly graphic, right, as we go on. He thinks that they rot quick in damp earth. The lean old ones together, then a kind of tallowy kind of cheesy, then begin to get black, treacle oozing out of them. Nothing to feed on but themselves. There's images of breeding maggots and so on. So we have these very graphic depictions of death. Then we get the mystery man, the man in the Macintosh, right, who appears here and will appear later. He says, now I'd give a trifle to know who he is. Always someone turns up you never dreamt of. I think that seems important to me, right? So this is the first appearance of some unknown man wearing a Macintosh. It's kind of a gloomy day. And that line just seems so significant. Always someone turns up you never dreamt of. So who is the man in the Macintosh, right? Is it, I don't know. I feel like 30 years ago we read it, we speculated maybe it's Joyce embodying himself in the work in a kind of trickster fashion and then disappearing again. There's this great one-liner, the Irishman's house is his coffin.
Yes.
Bloom thinks. There's reference again to metempsychosis. Bloom thinks suddenly, if we were all suddenly somebody else. Bloom is dutiful, and he puts down McCoy's name in the funeral book as he promised he would in the last chapter, right? So he does that. Even though he doesn't like McCoy, he nonetheless follows through, right, and does his duty because he said he would, right? He's a man of his word. We have references to Parnell, right, as a kind of Christ figure. Let us go around by the chief's grave, Haynes said. Power says, some say he is not in the grave at all, that the coffin was filled with stones, that one day he will come again. So apparently there's a myth about Parnell as a kind of Christ figure. There's also allusions
the once
to
and future king.
The once and future king, right, as referred to in the Portrait of the Artist.
Like Trump.
Oh, Jesus. There's allusion to Dante's Inferno. Bloom thinks to himself, how many? And these here once walk round Dublin, faithful, departed, as you are now, so once we were. So he just, again, how many people died? There's this constant death going on. And that's what Dante thinks when he first gets to the underworld, being led by Virgil. Like, he was just overwhelmed by the amount of shades and so on. And I think Eliot in The Wasteland borrows also from that, right? Doesn't he? Something about the vision of endless souls and so on. Okay, and then finally, our modern Ulysses at the end escapes Hades and he affirms life, right? He's about to exit finally. The gates... Ooh,
sorry.
Go back real fast. That's okay. The gates glimmered in front, still open. Back to the world again. Enough of this place. Plenty to see and hear and feel yet. Feel live, warm beings near you. Let them sleep in their maggoty beds. They are not going to get me this innings. Warm beds, warm, full-blooded life. So there's our hero affirming the full-bloodedness of life and rejecting this place of death, right?
Which is what Odysseus does in the Odyssey. He's eager to leave as well.
Right.
So
There you go.
it's a very, very clear parallel there. All right, well done. Let's quickly go through mine. Oh man, this appears much smaller than I thought it would. But as I said, I focus mostly on the characters and tried to flesh them out clearly in my mind. Probably besides Bloom, the most important of the four horsemen of the apocalypse would be Martin Cunningham. And in his honor, I have not shaved for the past few days. It's interesting how he's described as gravely shaking his beard or stroking his beard, caressing his beard. And as you said, he at least in Bloom's mind, he has Shakespeare's face. He always has a good word to say. So he's presented well, and then at the end, he's the one who talks to John Henry Menton. And according to Bloom, Martin laying down the law, Martin could wind a sappy head like that round his little finger without his seeing it. So he seems to think that Cunningham is a kind of ally, even though he interrupts him rudely, and along with the other two people in the carriage, ignores Bloom, right? He's constantly interrupted, ignored, looked at quizzically, like when he talks about the best death being the sudden death. So is he really an ally? I mean, what are we to make of that comment at the end, right? Bloom thinks he's kind of his champion, or he's kind of defending him. Do you think he really is?
Well, for me, this just underscores how Bloom, his relationship with his contemporaries is in its best iteration that a kind of, semi-sympathetic guy, right? In contrast to the others who are pretty much assholes completely, right? He doesn't have anybody close to him. He's not an insider. This is as close as he can perhaps get, right? Being viewed as the sort of outsider, the Jewish man, right? He's not one of us, etc. And also, this is ironic inversion of Homer, right? Because Homer is sailing to Hades with his men, and he is their leader, whereas here,
right,
Bloom, right,
he's the follower. Come along, Bloom.
Right.
Cunningham is the leader, right?
Yeah, I would say so. In this episode,
the correspondence here is that he's Sisyphus. I'm not sure I see that, but he's kind of the. I mean, the episode opens with his name, right? So he's very prominently featured, and he is the one who seems to be in charge, right? Come along, Bloom. Are we all here?
Mm-hmm. Right. Right. So yeah, that's the I guess this is his friend, quote unquote, right? This is at best a sympathetic contemporary, right? A sympathetic acquaintance is the best friendship that he seems to have.
Yeah, and he does stand up for him in a tacit way when he changes the topic of conversation after Power brings up suicide, right? Like, because he knows he protects Bloom in a way, but as we said, he's also capable of throwing him under the bus when it suits him. So
yeah,
with these Dubliners, a good guy is not like unambiguously good or unvarnished, like full of unvarnished goodness.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think he appears later in the Cyclops episode, doesn't he? While they're in Kieran's club. I'll have to. I think that's the case. So we may see Martin Cunningham again.
Okay, well, I found out today, or I remembered today, that he and I think Power as well are featured in a story from Dubliners called Grace. So if you want to learn more about some of these characters, you can read Grace and Dubliners. Now, you mentioned how people may or may not know about Bloom's cuckoldry, he knows some things about their private lives as well. About Cunningham, he, in his stream of consciousness, thinks, and that awful drunkard of a wife of his, setting up house for her time after time, and then pawning the furniture on him every Saturday almost, leading him the life of the damned.
Is that why he's Sisyphus? Maybe that's why he's Sisyphus.
Maybe.
His wife.
Yeah, it could be.
If he's having to set up his wife over and over again, he's doing that repetitive action, and every time the stone rolls back down, right? And he has to start over again. So he's got a wreck of a wife, drunkard wife, right?
Yeah, that's a good point. It could be that.
I guess that's it. I didn't thought about that, but that must be it.
He says, just continuing that section, where the heart out of a stone, that Monday morning start afresh. Yes, that's got to be why he's Sisyphus. That's why he's Sisyphus.
Figured it out. Okay.
Shoulder to the wheel, shoulder to the wheel. There you go, pushing that rock up. Lord, she must have looked a sight that night. Daedalus told me he was in there, drunk about the place and capering with Martin's umbrella. And they call me the jewel of Asia, the geisha. That is quite a scene, huh?
Yep. Nice.
And then Bloom thinks he looked away from me. He knows, rattle his bones. So he knows about the suicide. But anyway, another example of the complexity of these characters. It's like what we talked about with Garcia Marquez and the epic personages of 100 Years of Solitude, right? Like, there's so many things that we admire, while at the same time there are so many things we despise about every character.
Mm-hmm.
So there's something about that makes them very human.
Right.
They're
multifaceted.
They all contain multitudes, you might say. Right. But yeah, so that's interesting. And then Jack Power, who is described as having a mild face, a good looking face. Bloom thinks he's a nice fellow. And he also is, he, I guess, demonstrates an act of kindness towards Bloom too. When they're talking about the tour, Bloom says, oh, yes, we're getting all of these great names. They're coming along. And then Power says, and Madame, last but not least, meaning Molly, of course, right? So, maybe he's thinking about her in a prurient way, but at least publicly and officially and face to face, gives her due, right? And so in that sense, he's giving Bloom his due as well, since he's, her husband.
Right. Well, it's interesting that you highlight here in the slide about Jack Power that apparently Jack Power also has problems with his wife.
Well, that's what I wanted to get to. So he says, who knows, is that true about the woman he keeps? Not pleasant for the wife, yet they say, who was it told me? There is no carnal. Interesting. Also, Bloom has no carnal in his extramarital dalliance, right?
So Power has set up another woman, his side piece, right?
It seems like it, but there's no carnal. You would imagine that would get played out pretty quick. The carnal? Well, not necessarily, old Bloom. Yes, it was Crofton met him one evening bringing her a pound of rump steak. Did I spell that wrong? This print is so small I can barely see it. What is this she was? Barmaid in Juries, or the Moira, was it? So he's got a little bar wench, maybe one of the girls from Sirens, right? That he has set up as a kept woman. He brings her rump steak, spends time with her, but there's no carnal, allegedly. Who knows if that's true?
I think the no carnal probably refers to the wife, right? He says, who knows, is that true about the woman he keeps? Not pleasant for the wife, yet they say, who was it told me there is no carnal? In other words, I read it as, there's no carnal.
And that's why he's got the side piece, of course.
That's why he's got the side piece, right.
See, again, there's that ambiguity, because when I first read it, and just until now, having read it 6 times, like, I was thinking there was no carnal with the side piece.
No, it's got to be the wife. That's why.
Yeah, right. Sure.
Because it
comes who knows? Maybe he's got some kind of Catholic guilt about it. So he just, it could be like Bloom, right? Like, he just wants to have a female companion, but he doesn't want to betray his legally
No
married
way.
wife, and that's it. Why not?
No, because I don't think that's so. First of all, if you think about the way it says not pleasant for the wife, the fact that power has got a side piece.
Yes.
Right after that thought, he says, "Yet they say, who was it told me there is no carnal." So the thought about the wife,
meaning
no, I don't think so. Anyway, it doesn't matter. In my opinion, it's like there's no carnal between the husband and the wife, and so he's got this side piece to whom he brings rump steak, among other things.
Then what does this mean? You would imagine that would get played out pretty quick. What?
Not having sex would get played out pretty quick. Like, you can imagine not, right? So
there's no carnal with the side piece, and that's because the carnal with the side piece would get played out pretty quick. That's how I was reading it all along, I'm thinking, because this is Bloom, remember? He's the one thinking this. For him, maybe it would get played out quick. That's why I said, not necessarily, old Bloom.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, either way, the point is that these men who may know about Bloom, and Bloom is anxious that they know about him and his issues with his wife. They got
stories of their own.
I mean, Martin Cunningham's wife is basically, wrecking him financially and emotionally. Jack Powers cheating on his wife, in my opinion, screwing the side piece. In your opinion, maybe not screwing the side piece. But he's got a side piece, right? So who are these fuckers to judge? These Christian men, right? Anyhow.
I'll have to read that for a seventh time, maybe.
All right.
But okay,
who's Jack Powers' correspondence?
I don't think he had one. I don't think he had one.
Let me see if I've got my list here. Now that we're talking about Jack Powers.
No, there's not one for him, at least in the schema that I had. All right. So your interpretation is he's got a kept woman.
Yeah.
The wife doesn't like it, but because she's frigid or whatever, they don't have intercourse, and that would be intolerable. That would get played out pretty quick. Your wife. But see, this is why it's interesting, because how long has he been dealing with no carnal in his relationship? It hasn't played out quick. It hasn't played out quick for him.
Later, there's references to basically 11 years since Rudy's death.
So see, that's not very quick.
Yeah, well, fair enough. So anyway, Jack Power, he has a side piece. He may or may not be screwing the side piece.
Boning her, but he does bring that rump steak. Okay, so when we get to the Sirens episode, we got to see if there's any reference to, a girlfriend of his, right?
All right.
Barmaid, I can't remember which bar they're in. Barmaid in Juries or the Moira. Maybe his lady, his kept woman, is one of the Sirens. Something to think about. All right. So yeah, the other horseman is, of course, Simon Dedalus. We've talked about him quite a bit, but I thought it was I just love this phrase. Bloom looked at his angry mustache, right? I mean, that's such a great description. You know exactly what it means when you read it, but it's unexpected, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Not his angry face or whatever. His angry mustache. How is a mustache angry?
Right.
Great. And you talked about him being a noisy, self-willed man, and yet, Bloom admires that in a way because he cares about his heir, his son and heir, right? Like, even if he's not the best father, he is concerned about that legacy and passing something on and so on.
Something to hand on. Like, that's what Bloom wants, and that's what he will later hand on, some kind of wisdom, right, to Dedalus.
Yeah. And so most importantly, as Bloom notes, most amusing expressions that man finds. So these are his Simonisms, as I call them. You've already mentioned several. I may have a couple of extra ones, but the way, like, whatever you think about his sentimentality and mawkishness, and later he's pretty despicable when you see him interacting with his daughter, right? Dilly. Mm-hmm. There's Millie and Dilly. This is crazy. I don't know if you've gotten to that episode, Wandering Rocks, but you haven't yet, have you?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
Nope, I've not.
So there's a Dilly Joyce, just so you know. Millie and Dilly. And Molly, Millie, Dilly. So funny, these names. But
Mm-hmm.
the way he interacts with them, not very admirable, right? But he did impart to his son this gift for language, you might say, as John
Right.
Joyce did to James Joyce, right?
Right. Right.
It reminds me of some of my father's, expressions. I guess they're, instead of being like, Dublin-esque dichos, they're Arkansas dichos or something, right? I mentioned one in a chat with you recently, right? Like he would say, spit in one hand and wish in the other and see which one fills up first.
Yeah, that's good.
Or I would say, hey, can we go to McDonald's or whatever? Let's don't and say we did, would be his response,
Right.
So, yeah. All right, so the fourth horseman obviously is Bloom himself, who is sitting on something hard, and it is the soap. He's got a lot of shit in his pockets, right? Like before, he had a potato. I guess he still does have a wrinkly old potato that is kind of a talisman. You can read more about that on Blooms and Barnacles as well, but that appears later in the Circe episode, I was reminded. So he's sitting on on that soap that he got at Sweeney's, right?
Yes.
The not apothecary, the chemist, the pharmacy, we would say.
The pharmacist, I guess you'd say. Yeah.
But it's funny that I don't know, he's self-conscious enough that he doesn't want to change his position in front of them, Like, I don't know, if I was riding in a carriage with you and a couple of our friends, I'd say, oh shit, I'm sitting on soap, and I would just shift out of that in front of you. I wouldn't feel the need to hide it. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So it shows their lack of familiarity. They're not that close, they're supposedly friends, but not really.
Right.
All right, so the Simonisms, I'll just add a few that you didn't mention. I'll tickle his catastrophe, believe you me. That's a great one. You mentioned the one about the weather. When he sees Reuben J. Dodd, he shouts out the carriage, "The devil break the hasp of your back." And about Dignam, he says he was as decent a little man as ever wore a hat.
A backhanded compliment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, so as we said before, on the way to Glasnevin, they pass Stephen, and the narrator describes him as a lithe young man clad in mourning, a wide hat. That's his French quarter hat, is it? Yeah, Latin quarter hat, sorry. Bloom says, "There's a friend of yours gone by, Daedalus, your son and heir." And as you pointed out, the senior Daedalus asked, was that Mulligan cad with him? His fetus, Achates, that's, as you may know, that's Aeneas's constant companion, his faithful Achates, right? Aeneas being a kind of Ulysses character himself. Yeah, he's the Roman Ulysses he's Trojan originally, but anyway, another parallel to the Greco-Roman epic tradition. Boylan, as you mentioned, Bloom, this is important to know, Bloom is thinking of him. He's coming in the afternoon, her songs. And then, just that moment I was thinking, this is total synchronicity, Jungian synchronicity, right? Just as he's thinking of him and how he's going to visit Molly, they pass him on the street, right? And the others salute him, say, "How do you do?" to the worst man in Dublin. This is a funny phrase, too. There he is airing his quiff. I think that's actually Power who says that, but it sounds like something Simon would say. Reuben J. Dodd of the tribe of Reuben. He's described as a tall, black-bearded figure bent on a stick, stumping round the corner, and he showed them a curved hand open on his spine. Is he, like, debilitated or something? He's the description of him is pretty loathsome, right? This miser,
kind of a hunched over, almost kind of like haggard,
hunchback
figure,
miser, elderly. He's got like a Hasidic Jew's beard or something. And then Bloom is so eager to put him. That's an awfully good one that's going the rounds about Reuben J. and the Sun. Isn't it awfully good?
Yeah.
And they all cut him off and ignore him.
Well, they tell the story, right?
Yeah.
They don't let him. They don't let him participate in it as equals, right?
Yeah,
like,
not at all.
Whatever.
All right, then poor Dignam, right? We find out he has a breakdown, heart. That's what Cunningham says. Blazing face, red hot. You talked about too much John Barleycorn already. Talked about the best death. I thought this line was funny. First the stiff, then the friends of the stiff, right? There's that offhanded remark in this at this otherwise solemn occasion, right? Bloom has these somewhat blasphemous or inappropriate thoughts, some might say, but very realistic, you know. A sad case, 5 young children, you talked about that. A great blow to the poor wife. And then, interestingly, Bloom thinks, but she had the last laugh or something like that. Remember that?
How did she have the last laugh?
He died first.
Ah, right.
A great blow to the poor wife. He says, yeah, a great blow to the poor wife, Mr. Kernan added. Indeed, yes, Mr. Bloom agreed. Has the laugh at him now, he thinks.
Right. She's still alive, which is all that matters. Though her state is awful, right, with the 5 kids.
Yeah, this is an interesting little random thought he has. I call it the coffin flop. Bomb! Upset. A coffin bumped out onto the road. Burst open. Patty Dignam shot out and rolling over stiff in the dust in a brown habit too large for him. Red face. Gray now. Mouth fallen open. Asking what's up now. Quite right to close it. Looks horrid open. Then the insides decompose quickly. Much better to close up all the orifices. Yes, also, with wax. The sphincter loose. Seal up all. I mean... When I first read that, I remember very clearly the first time I read it, like before I read it with you as an undergrad when I read it, however many years ago. I thought this actually happened.
Oh, that his corpse fell out.
Yes, I read it several times like, what? Wait, because look how it says, Dignam shot out and rolling over stiff in the dust in a brown habit too large for him. That's a contrary to fact situation. It's a what if. Right? But the way I think it's deliberately ambiguous. Joyce, trickster that he is, wants us to go back and reread and realize, oh, wait, he's imagining that, right? Because they were talking about how, you know, another corpse had fallen.
Right. It's kind of a grotesque, cartoony almost image, right? You know,
hence coffin flop. Yeah,
with the,
that'll be in the show
bomb.
Notes. I've got a clip that I shared with you that put in the show notes. All right, so just some other interesting trivia. The Gordon Bennett race. Someone, I think it's Simon, says that will be a great race tomorrow in Germany. The Gordon Bennett. I couldn't be less interested in a car race, but that's what this is. Yes, by Jove, that will be worth seeing. Actually, that's deadless. And according to Wikipedia, the 1904 Gordon Bennett motor race took place in Germany on 17 June. So it really was tomorrow, you know, from their perspective. The child's murder case you mentioned, found this in an article on the Guardian website. In October 1899, James Joyce, age 17, attended all 3 days of the trial in Dublin of Samuel Childs for the brutal murder of his brother. So that was a real thing. That actually happened.
And a young Joyce went out of his way to watch this.
Yeah, he did. All 3 days. All right, Father Coffee, the white smocked priest, came after him. I think it's like the altar boy, tidying his stole with one hand, balancing with the other a little book against his toad's belly. That's a hilarious description. Who will read the book? I, said the rook. That's from a folk song called Cock Robin, for those who don't know. So this Father Coffee, this priest, is described as having a fluent croak. So he really is like a toad. I knew his name was like a coffin, thinks Bloom. Coffee, coffin. That's great. Bully about the muzzle he looks. Bosses the show. Muscular Christian. Woe betide anyone that looks crooked at him. So he is the hound of hell, Kerberos.
Right.
Bursts sideways like a sheep in clover. Daedalus says he will, with a belly on him like a poisoned pup. There's another Simonism.
So he's got the name like a coffin. He's kind of bullyish and big and sort of stalwart, I guess. And he's
maybe
Cerberus.
not. He's just about the gut. He is, right.
Yeah, right.
He's got a
right.
belly on him like a poisoned pup. Otherwise, he's probably not that impressive.
He's got a toad's belly
physical
as well.
specimen, right?
Right.
I mean, a frog. You think about it, he's like skinny, except he's got a fat face and stomach, right?
Right.
So,
right. What does Cerberus do in the Hades? Does he?
I mean, he's the many-headed hound of hell.
The three-headed head of. Yeah, I'm trying to remember if he has some kind of role.
Well, specifically in the Odyssey, I don't know. We'd have to look that up.
Anyhow, doesn't matter.
All right, John Henry Menton, the Ajax character. According to Daedalus, he's not the worst in the world. Apparently, he was Dignam's employer, but Dignam couldn't keep the job. Liquor, what? That's why. Too much John Barleycorn. Bloom thinks, or no, he thinks of Bloom. This is Menton himself. I fell foul of him one evening, I remember, at bowls. So as you say, they're playing that bowling game. And I don't think you included this quote, but it's hilarious. In God's name, what did she marry a coon like that for? A coon? Wow. That's what he says about Bloom. She had plenty of game in her then.
Plenty of game.
And then
she's an armful too, right?
Yes. And I think it's, who is it? Ned Lambert. He says she still does.
Mm-hmm.
You know? So all these suitors are lusting after our Ulysses' wife, right?
Right.
So Bloom thinks solicitor, I think. I know his face. Menton, John Henry, solicitor, commissioner for oaths and affidavits. Dignam used to be in his office. Why he took such a rooted dislike to me. Hate at first sight. So there's that Ajax Odysseus rivalry. Yeah. Got a dinge in the side of his hat. Tom Kernan. I thought he was a very interesting character. Maybe Protestant, right? He says, this cemetery is a treacherous place. And he's critical of the whole Catholic service. The Reverend Gentleman read the service too quickly. Don't you think? He's talking to Bloom. The service of the Irish church used in Mount Jerome is simpler, more impressive. I am the resurrection and the life. That touches a man's inmost heart. More on that in a minute. And then Bloom notes his quick, bloodshot eyes, secret searching eyes. Mason, I think, not sure. Bloom, this is interesting because Bloom later is suspected of being a Mason. So they're both kind of outsiders, you know? He's more accepted. Kernan, that is more accepted than Bloom probably, but still, he's kind of, you know, these good Catholics would probably be suspicious of him. Maybe he's Protestant, maybe he's a Freemason. And then Bloom says, beside him again, we are the last, in the same boat. That phrase has, you know, multiple meanings to me, right? They're last, but also they're the last that these others think about. They're odd men out, you know? You know what I'm saying?
So Kernan is... They run into him while they're there, right?
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, right.
Gotcha.
I mean, there are only 4 in the carriage, right? They get out of the carriage, and there are all these other people there. John Henry Menton is there because he used to employ Dignam.
Some of the others, right.
Lambert, Tom Kernan, Corny Kelleher, who's the funeral director, right? Corny might have given us a more commodious yoke, they say. Remember, there are crumbs in the carriage. We didn't talk about this while recording, but we were talking about it earlier this week via text. So they sit on some crumbs and they're like, what? Were they having a secret picnic party in here? And you had a theory that maybe people had sex in there?
Well, that was mentioned in the Ulysses guide as a possibility. I'm not sure I agree with that. But
yeah, I didn't get that either.
They're definitely displeased with the shabby nature of the funeral carriage that Kelleher has rented for them.
Right. So we have, I mean, it's suggested that he's not a great funeral director, right? He's kind of a shabby, low-class kind of person when it comes to this job. And, all right, this is another one of those details that caught my attention and gave me some concern. He might This is in response to the comment that Corny might have given us a more commodious yoke. He might if he hadn't that squint troubling him. Do you follow me? And that's Deadless. And Cunningham says, it struck me too. And then later, he looked on them from his drawling eye. So you looked this up, and the GIF seemed to think that this was a reference to I guess there's kind of like a proverb or something about a tailor who skimps. So the squint is kind of related to skimp.
Stinginess.
Yeah, he doesn't use enough material when making garments or whatever. But I think it's a literal lazy eye, or as it says here, drawling eye. I think he's got something with one of his eyes, which I don't know. It's like I don't know why they're debating that. Like they hadn't noticed it before, or it's a recent development. I don't know. Maybe there'll be more about that later. He also seems to have policeman's shoulders. I think he works as a police informant. So again, we're fleshing out all these characters. You hear all these names, and it's like, who? What? And we just get a little bit at a time. So for me, it's useful to put all this together and try to, form images of these minor characters. Ned Lambert. So who's this guy? Well, he's the one talking to John Henry Minton. He's the one who says, Bloom, Madam Marion Tweedy, the soprano. She's his wife. And then Minton asked, didn't he, sell stationery? Wasn't he in the stationery line? Yes, in Wisdom Healy's A Traveler for Blotting Paper. And that they don't, they're not impressed with that. He does some canvassing for ads, he says of Bloom.
So Bloom has a history of being a salesman. Either he's selling blotting paper, now he sells ads.
Yeah, and Healy's, that occurs later too in Wandering Rocks, and maybe before. Nice, but then Bloom thinks of Ned Lambert. Nice soft tweed Ned Lambert has in that suit. Tinge of purple. He's looking at his clothes while, everyone else is, well, who knows what they're thinking. Maybe their minds are wandering too, but and then he says his wife, I forgot he's not married, or his landlady ought to have picked out those threads for him. So again, he knows details about the personal lives of these other people, just as they may or may not know about his personal life. You know what I'm saying there?
There you go.
Joe Hines, I am just taking names. So he's the one writing down all the names. Bloom mentions McCoy. He says, Charlie, I know he was on the Freeman once. So McCoy worked on the newspaper one time. And most importantly, he's the one who writes down Macintosh. I don't know who he is. Is that his name? And then he walks away and Bloom says, no, but it's too late.
Yeah, I think this is important, right? So if you go back for a second, Bloom has told McCoy in the last chapter, whom he doesn't like. And remember, McCoy is almost like a kind of double for Bloom, right? He also has a performing wife. But he tells him, I will put your name down in the funeral, right?
Right.
And then when he does, he says McCoy, which is misheard as Macintosh for the man on the Macintosh. And so Macintosh is written down, the mystery man, in the funeral documentation, right?
Well, he writes down both names. He writes down McCoy's name first. He's like, Charlie, I know him. He was on the Freeman once. And then he's like, what about that? What about that other guy over there? The one in the, and then Bloom says Macintosh.
Oh, okay. My bad.
Right? He completes the sentence for him.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, I could find the actual passage.
No, that's good. That makes sense.
Yeah. All right. Anyway. No, here it is. And tell us, Hines said, do you know that fellow is over there in the... He looked around. Macintosh. Yes, I saw him, Mr. Bloom said. Where is he now? Macintosh, Hines said, scribbling. I don't know who he is. Is that his name? He moved away, looking about him. No, Mr. Bloom began, turning and stopping. I say, Hines!
Right.
Didn't hear.
Right.
What? Where's he disappeared to? Not a sign. Well, of all the... Has anybody here seen... And so on.
Right.
All right. So the caretaker, Hades, finally, a portly man, and his name is O'Connell, John O'Connell. He never forgets a friend. My dear Simon, I don't want your custom at all, he says. Of course, Simon has recently been there for the burial of his wife, right?
What does I don't want your custom at all mean?
Simon Dedalus says, I pay you another visit. And he says, I don't want your custom at all. Meaning, I don't want you to be my customer here at my place of business,
Right. Gotcha.
the graveyard, right? I'm not happy to see you bringing your dead loved ones here, right? That's what he's saying.
He never forgets a friend, just like Hades accepts all of the dead, right?
And this is interesting. He's puzzling two keys at his back. That's such a vivid image, you know? You can just imagine him walking, this big portly guy, and he's got these two keys. Keys to what? It makes Bloom think of Key's ad, right? The ad that he's going to place for his customer when he goes to the newspaper. I don't know if you got to that, but anyway.
I read it.
So Hades, the caretaker, the Undertaker, tells them a joke. He's talking to Cunningham and Hines. Did you hear that one about Mulcahy from the Coombe? And I won't repeat the joke. It's not that humorous, but he is trying to lighten the mood, is how Cunningham and Hines interpret it. And then Bloom thinks, fancy being his wife. Wonder how he had the gumption to propose to any girl. Come out and live in the graveyard. Daniel O'Connell must be a descendant, I suppose. So he could be, a descendant of the great Dan O. And, how did Hades get his wife? He basically stole her, right? He raped her. I mean, used in the etymological sense. He snatched that girl, took her down to the underworld. All right, the Lynchian mystery man. This is great. This is one of my favorite passages. Now, who is that lanky-looking galoot over there in the Macintosh? Now, who is he, I'd like to know? Now, I'd give a trifle to know who he is. Always someone turns up you never dreamt of. And then Bloom later thinks, and of course that is Bloom, right? This word galoot.
Yeah.
Galoot. Had you ever heard that?
No, I hadn't.
Actually, that is another Donism. My father used that word. You big galoot. You big
clumsy
galoot.
or oafish person, apparently.
But it's so funny that it's also an Irish, maybe it's originally an Irish expression, but he used it. I remember it well from my childhood. All right, so Bloom thinks 12, I'm 13. No, the chap in the Macintosh is 13. Death's number. Where the deuce did he pop out of? He wasn't in the chapel, that I'll swear. Silly superstition, that about 13. So 13 also, you got 12 disciples plus Jesus, so that's 13. Is Macintosh Jesus? Is Bloom Jesus? You know what I'm saying?
Are they Judas? Is he Judas?
Right. And the chapel, it's important to mention that because before they go to the graveyard with the barrow and actually bury Dignam, they go to a little chapel first, right?
Mm-hmm.
I didn't catch that the first couple times, but later it becomes clear. And Bloom takes the newspaper out, puts it down, and then rests his knee on it, and he puts his hat on the other knee. Do you remember that?
Yes,
all of these details are, the reader can savor them if he chooses to. All right, so two of the nationalistic heroes, you got O'Connell. Interestingly, before we get to the graveyard, they passed the huge cloaked Liberator's Forum. You remember the O'Connell statue on one of the main thoroughfares? When we went back to our holiday apartment, we would pass by there every day. That statue was there at this time in 1904. The carriage passes by that, and then they get to Glasnevin, and there's actually a monument to Daniel O'Connell, the O'Connell Circle, and Mr. Power's soft eyes went up to the apex of the lofty cone. There's a big, phallic symbol there. He's at rest in the middle of his people, old Dano, but his heart is buried in Rome. Oh, that Irish sentimentality. So disgusting. And then Parnell,
Who's speaking that?
About the heart buried in Rome.
Yeah.
Let me see who that is.
It's not Bloom, though. That's the point, right?
It's Power.
Okay.
Mr. Power's soft eyes went up to the apex of the lofty cone. Cone. He's at rest, he said. Yeah, that's Power.
I think Power's the one who enunciates that myth of Parnell also as being perhaps the Christ figure, right? That'll come again later.
Well, let's see. Yes, you're right. You're
So
right.
Parnell, Parnell's a sentimental Irishman, just like
Power.
Power is a sentimental Irishman in contrast to Bloom.
With awe, Mr. Power's blank voice spoke. Some say he is not in that grave at all, that the coffin was filled with stones, that one day he will come again.
Yeah.
Hines shook his head. Parnell will never come again, he said. He's there, all that was mortal of him, peace to his ashes. So you're right, it is Power. He's the one who
he's a sentimentalist,
has these sentimental views. But who is it? Hines is the one who says, "Let us go round by the chief's grave." So they all want to take a stroll, and it is impressive. There's that huge rock, and it just says Parnell. No dates, no nothing. It's like everyone knows what that is. You know. You remember, don't you?
Yeah, that big rock.
Yeah. The big rock.
The big rock just sort of dumped right there, right? With
Yeah.
the name on it. Yeah.
All right, here we are at the end. The heart. There's so many references to hearts. Okay, just like we had references to black and white. I won't read them all, but there is one that I do want to read. This is a fantastic passage. It's actually when Bloom is with Kernan. And he says, Kernan does, "I am the resurrection and the life." That touches a man's inmost heart. It does, Mr. Bloom said. But then, here's what Bloom thinks to himself. Your heart, perhaps, but what price the fellow in the 6 feet by 2 with his toes to the daisies? No touching that. Seat of the affections, broken heart, a pump, after all, pumping thousands of gallons of blood every day. One fine day it gets bunged up, and there you are. Lots of them lying around here. Lungs, hearts, livers, old rusty pumps. Damn the thing else. The resurrection and the life. Once you are dead, you are dead. The last day idea, knocking them all up out of their graves. Come forth, Lazarus. And he came fifth and lost the job. Get up, last day. Then every fellow mousing around for his liver and his lights and the rest of his traps. Fine damn all of himself that morning. Pennyweight of powder in a skull. 12 grams, 1 pennyweight. Troy measure. That's hilarious.
Good. That's really good. His view of the heart is just a mechanical instrument, right? He completely demystifies it. He's not going to sentimentalize it, right? As the seat of affections, right, etc. It's just a pump in the body. One day it gives out and you're dead.
And he's not having any of that, resurrection and
no, he's not.
Doomsday, scenario where all the dead rise up. And it's hilarious, right? Because if there is resurrection of the body, then you would have to do that, right? Oh, where's my damn heart? Where's my liver?
Right.
Where are my lungs? Right. Oh,
scoop all your decayed bits up and bring
them as he says, every fellow mousing around for his liver and his lights and the rest of his traps. That's amazing. All right, and then as we leave the land of hell, as we leave Hades, there's one other beautiful passage I just want to share. You talked about the open gates. The gates glimmered in front, still open, back to the world again. Enough of this place. Bring you a bit nearer every time. Last time I was here was Mrs. Seneco's funeral. There's another Dubliner's reference.
Right.
Poor Papa, too, the love that kills, and even scraping up the earth at night with a lantern like that case I read of to get at fresh buried females, or even putrefied with running grave sores. Give you the creeps after a bit. I will appear to you after death. You will see my ghost after death. My ghost will haunt you after death. There is another world after death named hell. I do not like that other world, she wrote. No more do I. Plenty to see and hear and feel yet. Feel live, warm beings near you. Let them sleep in their maggoty beds. They are not going to get me this innings. Warm beds, warm, full-bloodied life. So it's a complete rejection of death and celebration of life, right?
And the beds that he's referring to, it's Molly's bed, right? The sort of source of life and pleasure and so on, in contrast. The bed, by the way, that Blazes will avail himself of later, right? which Bloom also knows, but he's embracing the corporeal world and all of its fleeting pleasures and consolations, and rejecting this grisly place, right? While refusing to believe in the Christian notion of resurrection, just as like, Odysseus, you remember, was offered immortality by Calypso, and he rejected that to go return to his wife, right? Just as Bloom is going to return to his wife, the flesh, the warm bed, etc.
Yeah. Speaking of pumps, Blazes Boylan will do some pumping of his own. All right, so the playlist, as is now a HJS, I guess. All in favor, say aye. Aye. So there's some great, there's so many. I'm probably forgetting some. We got Highway to Hell, AC/DC. Hellhound on My Trail, Robert Johnson. The Day Pat Murphy Died by, well, one version is by Great Big Sea. Could be Pat Dignam, right? But anyway, Patty Murphy. The Black Angels Death Song by Velvet Underground, and then Life Song by The Black Angels. Ashes to Ashes, David Bowie. I Am the Resurrection by The Stone Roses. The Death and Resurrection Show, Killing Joke, The Eternal, Joy Division. That is a hauntingly beautiful dirge. Symmetry Gates by The Smiths. Thanks to Brother John for that suggestion. And thanks to Ryan Whitlow for John Barleycorn Must Die by Traffic. Any other songs you would like to add to the playlist?
It's a pretty good list. I can't think of them right now, but I'll definitely let you know if some come to mind.
All right. So, as always, support HJS. Buy your copy of Flansday, Volume 1 in the Aaron-esque series of novelettes by Mark Will and G.J. Villa. Volume 2, Wild's Day, coming soon. Don't forget to subscribe to Mark Will's Substack. That's my Substack. Mark Will Wright, WRITE.substack.com. On YouTube, it's at Mark Will Wright, WRITE. Join the 30 other people who watch our videos on a regular basis. All right, let's close out of this. And here we are again in all our glory, two ugly mugs. We did it in just over 2 hours, but by the time I edit it, it'll be under 2 hours, I assume. Any closing thoughts on episode 6?
No, I guess in some ways I feel like Bloom. You know, you exit the place of death and you want to return back to life, right? A tremendously rich, complex, brooding, dark episode. And then we're going to move from the place of death. The next episode will be the place of work, I suppose, in the streets of Dublin, right? The busy, windy streets of Dublin is depicted in, what is it, Aeolus, right?
Aeolus.
We'll get to that next.
Specifically, the newspaper.
The newspaper
office.
Right.
And Bloom and Stephen cross paths, sort of, here.
Right.
And stylistically, we've got something new with all these headlines, but we'll save that for next time. We'll talk off camera about when we might want to record episode 7, but here we are. We finished episode 6, which we can say is 33% of the book, you know, in terms of episodes. We've done 6 out of 18. And
hardly in terms of length.
Not in terms of length, but, you know, as we said, like it's now becoming impossible to discuss everything in a 2-hour episode or to, you know, document everything in our notes. So we may have to be more choosy about what we include in our notes and what we actually talk about. But I still think we're doing this the right way. You know, you send me your notes and then I try not to duplicate. And I kind of like the way I did a plot summary and then my notes were kind of modeled after that. And maybe there are a few miscellaneous items here and there. But as always, it's a whole universe. You cannot possibly discuss everything or even notice everything. I'm sure we missed a lot. But for me, episode 6, it's one of my favorites, probably my favorite of those we've read so far. It's just, and that's why I read it so many times. It's just, I don't know, there's something about the descriptions and the theme and the topic. Maybe it's that incubism. Maybe I'm an incubist and don't know it. Or maybe I just have a black heart.
There it is. There it is.
All right.
A
Well,
great episode for sure.
yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah. All right. Well, we'll pick up there next time. Thanks to all you book burners once again. This has been episode 6 of James Joyce's Ulysses. It's the Hades episode. Tune in next time when we discuss episode 7, Aeolus, which takes place at the newspaper office in Dublin. So tune in then, and we'll see you next time.